Hey guys, I'm back. I was going to make this video about Asatru. I have no idea how you pronounce it in English, but that's how you pronounce it in Swedish. I have a couple of points I want to go over, and I've written them down and I want to make sure that I mention them, so that's why I'm looking down all the time. Anyway, so the first one is the name itself, Asatru. Tru means faith. And Asatru in this case means faith or believing in the ace gods, basically. And then they are, of course, talking about, you know, Odin, Thor, Freya, etc. The Norse pantheon, and then the main players in the Norse pantheon. The next thing I want to mention is that there is a huge range, all the way from extremely inclusive to extremely exclusive. And I think many people have heard about the extreme right-wing side that there is to Asatru, which is groups of people that believe that it's a true Germanic faith that should only be practiced by people that have true Germanic blood. And of course then you sort of get into the whole Nazi mindset somehow. And then it goes all the way to the left side, where there's people that combine it with Wicca, combine it with shamanism. Here there's people that combine it with a type of shamanism that comes from Lapland. Yeah. The people I contacted here in Sweden when I decided to learn more about Asatru were a national organization that were more on the more inclusive side of the spectrum, sort of. The first thing I did was trying to get them to define what Asatru is. And the first thing they said, well, we don't like to call it Asatru, we like to call it fornsed, which literally means traditions from before. I then asked them about how reconstructionistic they are. In general, you can say that you take the old tradition, for as far as you can find it, you combine it with mythology, and then, at least within the inclusive branch that I met, you let modern life influence it and shape it into what would work now for you. That's something I really like about it, because, you know, a tradition from 10 years ago also evolves. I, with my family, don't, even if I would have been a Christian, wouldn't celebrate Christmas in exactly the same way as I, as a child, would have celebrated it with my parents. Traditions evolve over time, so reconstructionism doesn't make a lot of sense to me. To me, it's a very fantasyful way of looking at faith. So I like that modern life gets to play a part in influencing traditions and to make it fit and work in the world how it works now. Then I wanted to move on to how do they view the world, or the divine, or the combination of the two. As far as I could judge, the Norse gods are seen more as people than I see the gods and goddesses. But of course, again, this is something that differs from individual to individual. Also, if you compare mythologies between, for instance, the Greek mythology and the Norse mythology, I am of the opinion that Norse gods and goddesses are much more flawed, which makes them mirror people much more than the Greek gods and goddesses. The Greek gods and goddesses also have their flaws here and there, but those flaws are, in my experience, how I see it, those flaws are there to show us that nothing can be perfect. But when you look at the flaws in the Norse gods and goddesses, they seem to be there to show how much alike human beings they are. Then the mythology itself. I asked about this in a video once before, not linked to Asatru. And I asked, how do you view myths? How do you use them? Do you use them as a story from which you can learn something, or do you use them as a history book of something that has actually happened? And I try to research this question a bit within Asatru as well. And again, as with the personification level of the gods and goddesses, this is also a very individual, differing aspect of Asatru, of the faith, or of the path. One person can see it as history, while another sees it as art, and yet another sees it as a collection of stories that used to be told to learn things from. The world creation stories, or the world creation myth, is quite interesting and somewhat silly. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but it becomes quite silly. But then again, many different creation stories are quite silly. And I like reading creation stories from different faiths and different parts of the world, because they say so much about how people view the world, about how people experience how things work in the world. If you ever get the chance, you should try and look up the stories, the Aboriginal stories of creation. They're amazing. They're so fantasyful. They're like having a philosophical conversation with a child, you know, about why can a bird fly, and then letting a child answer. It's amazing. If you ever have the time, you should look into those. Then, so this was all quite abstract, you know. How do you see the gods, and what do you do with that in your mind and in your experience? How do you try and experience the divine? And now we're coming to practice. How do you practice Asatru? Well, the only thing really that you need to do is bringing offerings. And they do have eight feasts, 8 festivals a year, and you go outside and you offer some of your juice or some of your mead while you talk to one of the gods or goddesses. And preferably that would be a local god or goddess, or a god or goddess that is very specific for that time of year. But locality is very important within Asatru. I guess that's part of the tradition, trying to find out and going back to what people used to do, and people usually had local gods and goddesses, as is also very common within Celtic paths, I think. Those offerings or those ceremonies are called, well, in Swedish at least, they're called a blod. and I had the lovely opportunity to spend a midsummer blut with them. At midsummer I was still living quite close to Stockholm, and I joined a group there, and it was amazing. They actually did make it into a little bit more of a ceremony and not just offering. It was fantastic. A maypole, it's a Swedish thing to to put up a maypole at midsummer. So that's a local tradition. And of course, with that maypole, it's not just a pole with ribbons. The Swedish maypole, or the Swedish midsummer pole, I should say, because it's not a maypole, is a long beam, and then at the top there's different versions. It can either be a long cross, and then at the cross here there's two hoops, sort of, and everything is always covered in greens. And the other option is a long pole and then a hoop that hangs around the top of it, which is a more traditional one, or rather, the first one I mentioned is more popular at the moment. The second one I mentioned is more old tradition. And they had prepared a big ass hoop and a big ass pole, and divided the group in men and women. And the women were going to decorate the hoop with flowers, so it became a flower wreath. And the men were going to decorate the pole in greens. And then after we did that, the women picked up the hoop and went first. The men picked up the pole and went after the women, and then we danced around the circle with live played music, which was really nice. We danced around the circle 3 times, so the pole chasing the hoop, sort of, you know, and then in the end they get together and the marriage is consumed. It was amazing. Maybe it was more amazing to me because it was the first time ever that I got to celebrate a Sabbath with more than 2 people, and I had a fantastic time, and I felt extremely welcome, and it was really nice. So that was my midsummer.